All right, and away we go. So it's nice and loud. I'd like to welcome everybody to Methods of Experimental Psychology. So what we're going to do today to get this semester started is this will be just an introduction to the course, so just a sort of welcome to the class. So we'll start off with a brief introduction of who I am, just a little bit about myself. Then we'll do a course overview. We'll take a look at the course procedure. We'll do some syllabus highlights, and we'll also have a little mental stretch, mental workout, just to shake off any summer cobwebs. All right, so let's start off with who I am. My name is Dr. Igor Yurichevich, and one of the hardest parts of this course is learning how to say that last name, so we'll get that over with right now. So we'll break it down into parts. Like I like to do many complex topics. So it starts off with a U, and that's followed by a reach. And then you open up and you say ah, and then finally it ends with a veach. And if there's any math specialists out there, this little gray triangle there is a veach. So it's U reach, veach. So let's try that on 3. 1, 2, 3. That's not bad for 10 a.m. on a first week. All right, so this slide is incredibly important in this class because you are going to have a lot of questions. Experimental psychology is a new way of thinking. It's oftentimes not intuitive. It's not something that comes naturally, as you're going to see, to most people. So if you ever have a question, simply during the lecture, raise your hand, refer to the slide. Dr. Yurichevich, can you go over that one more time? Dr. Yurichevich, can you provide another example for that? Or if you have any comments that you'd like to add. So, Dr. Yurichevich, I just read about this experiment, in online, and is that what you're talking about here? So anything you might have, any questions, anything you might want to add to the class, feel free. Just raise your hand, Dr. Yurichevich, and then let me know what you need. So that's the name. Other things about me, some of the research projects that I have currently going on. So this is a course on how to do psychology research, how to understand psychology research. So I'll give you a bit of background on the stuff that I'm currently working on. So my field of study right now is visual language. So much like we have a written language, much like we have a verbal language, we also have a visual language, symbols, pictures that we understand. And this is actually a very quickly developing field because much of our communication is going very visual these days. So right now I'm taking a look at how does our mind process this visual information? How do you understand what an artist might be trying to communicate to you? And one of the areas of my research, we take a look at art that tries to communicate a lot of information, specifically comic book art. So me and some students have done studies where we take a look at basically the grammar of visual language. So we take a look and we survey comic book art, and we'll find information, structures, techniques that are used over and over and over again, basically things that are part of the grammar of visual language. So for example, in this case, we have 2 pictures by 2 different artists, and yet you can see that in both cases, they drew the villain very large on the page. This is a metaphor. These villains are not actually huge, but they are metaphorically being communicated as being dangerous, as being imposing, as being a threat to the hero. So this is the kind of studies that I do to try to take a look at how is that information communicated and how do we understand what the artist was intending. Another piece of grammar that I'm actually going to be presenting at a conference in about a week and a half has to do with asymmetry being used to communicate information. So in this case, both heroes, both Daredevil and Falcon over here, they could have been placed in the center of the page. The artist had that option, but the artist said, no, I want to put them off to the side a little bit. I want that asymmetry. And that's a metaphor for people just being a little bit other than you, a little bit different from you. Most of nature is symmetrical, so we are bilaterally symmetrical. We got left arms and right arms. But anything that's asymmetrical makes us feel a little bit uneasy, makes us feel as if it's something else, and that's what this artist was trying to communicate. Other studies that I've looked at how do we understand motion in a static picture. So we understand here that the flash is running, even though nothing is moving on this screen. And I looked at the interaction between literal information, things that actually happen when you're running, such as the position of the arms and the legs here, but also metaphorical information, things that don't happen when you're running, such as these action lines. So how do we understand the combination of those? How do we understand that something is supposed to be metaphorical and not taken literal? So we took a look at all that, and that was actually published with one of a former student here at IUSB, where we took a look and reported on how does the mind understand metaphors and literal information and how to combine them. So we actually got 2 publications out of that, one in the Comics Grid, Journal of Comic Scholarship, and then the other one in the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics just last year. Other things that I'm taking a look at in my lab, and this is with another former IUSB student, is the metaphor of gigantic size. So a lot of times in a picture, an artist will draw a person or a figure as being gigantic when they're not actually gigantic. So Mockingbird over here, she's a regular sized human being, but the artist drew her huge to metaphorically emphasize her importance, her strength, her centrality to the story, like she is the one that, this story is all about. So this is a metaphoric use of gigantic size. But then you also have literal uses of gigantic size. So this is an image of Galactus, and Galactus actually is a gigantic individual. He's a literal giant. He's, 200, 300 feet tall. So how do we as viewers understand that this is to be taken metaphorically, whereas this is going to be taken literally, right? So just the same way in language, when you say you're talking to your friend and you're like, oh, John has a heart of stone, right? We understand that's metaphor. They mean that John is emotionless, he's cold, he's ruthless. They don't mean that John needs to be rushed to the hospital for an operation, right? Because his heart is stone. So how do we understand that visually? This is metaphorical, this is literal. So we took a look at that, and this will also be something I'm going to be presenting at the conference. And this was actually also published with a student of mine in the International Journal of Comic Art. And then just one last little thing, just to kind of show you the kind of experimental psychology that you can do with the skills that you learn here in this class. Everybody kind of understands this metaphor here, light bulb above the head. This individual just had a great idea. But how does that metaphor kind of spread throughout a visual language? How does that metaphor become something that is incorporated into the visual language? So how does it become like a saying or phrase or an idiom? That was the latest piece of research that I did. And I looked at a metaphor that is known as Closeup Eye Asymmetry. So this is a metaphor where you put a close-up of the face, and then you put something asymmetrical, but specifically around the eyes. So here we have Storm with electricity coming out of one eye. There's nothing about this character that should not have electricity coming out of the other eye. Same thing with Magneto. He's got powers on both sides of them. Same thing with Harbinger here. He's got powers on both sides of them. And then you also have instances where from the composition, artists put things on one side or the other. So this skull here could have been right in front of the face. The artist said, no, I want to cover a part of the face. I specifically want to cover the eye. You can use shading. You can use composition. And then also you can use non-diegetic or not part of the story composition. So again, we got asymmetry here, we got asymmetry here. So where did this come from and how did it spread through this visual language? And believe it or not, I traced it back to a single kind of crystallizing moment that influenced all of these artists that really started to use this metaphor. It's used in Cable. So Cable is he's actually got double eye asymmetry. He's got scars on one side. He's got a light up eye on the other side. And these use of these metaphors can actually be traced back to an image that David Bowie had back in 1974 on his cover for Paladinsane. So children who are at the right age, in between 9 and 13 years old, who were artistic, who saw this image, they were impacted. They had this crystallizing event where that influenced their artistic trajectory. And then in the 90s, when they started to really have their greatest output, so artists typically have their most exciting or most productive work in their 30s. When these artists came up in their 30s, that's when this metaphor just kind of exploded. So there's evidence that it all has to do with that one image. And that was published also in the Comics Grid. And to my knowledge, that's the only time that this has ever been done, where people have traced back a metaphor, not to the first time that it was used, but to that crystallizing experience that had it explode in terms of popularity. So all of that has to do with experimental techniques, experimental analyses, experimental psychology, everything that you're going to be learning about in this course. So any questions about any of that before we turn to some other things? Makes sense? All right. So before we get on to our activity to kind of start this day off, I'll just let you know, if you want to learn more about some of the research that I'm doing in my lab, if you want to learn more about some of the research that students of mine are doing, I do post regularly online and Twitter and Instagram. So at Paladinsane is my handle for both of those. And then if you also want to take a look at just some other things that are coming out of the lab, coming out of my work, you can also check out the hashtag Comic Book Scientist. And for some of the work that my students have done, you can check out the hashtag Too Hard for Soft Science. And you can take a look at some of the stuff we've been up to. And I'll be updating this real soon with some of the stuff at the upcoming conference. All right, one last thing about me before we turn to other things. So the National Alliance on Mental Illness has this program called Stigma Free. It's an effort to try to battle the stigmas that are attached to mental illnesses, mental disorders, to kind of lift the veil off of these so that people don't feel intimidated if they have a mental illness. So in that spirit, last thing I'll let you know about myself is that I do battle depression, and it's better now, but it wasn't just a couple years ago. So just to kind of show you the trajectory and what can happen when you suffer from depression. This is a timeline up until spring of last year. So that's when I started here at IUSB. That, in the spring of 2012, was when I was formally diagnosed with depression. And one of the reasons that I always want to make sure that I talk about this and that stigma-free initiative is so important is that I was diagnosed with depression right there, but I was battling depression for a long time prior to that, because like so many people with a mental illness, I did not seek help. I felt embarrassed. I felt that I'd be judged by the world. So I stayed silent and suffered for way too long. Finally diagnosed with depression, thanks to my wife. And then I was on a prescription. I was on cognitive behavioral therapy. I had my final prescription filled in the spring of 2013. I wish that that was the end of it, that I could say, hey, I'm depression free, but really recovery takes a while and I'm still in the process of recovery. There's some good things, there's some steps back, steps forward. But just to kind of show you what can happen, and just to encourage anybody that might be going through this or might know somebody that's going through this, that there is light on the other side of the tunnel. One of the ways that they measure productivity at a university is how many publications do you have? How many peer-reviewed, how many non-peer-reviewed publications? How much of your research are you getting out there into the world, into these scientific journals? Well, I had one publication in the fall of 2012, and then I had nothing for the longest time until I was into my recovery, until things got better. And then in the spring, of 2016, I had two publications. Later on in that year, I had another publication. And then in 2017, add another 5. So you can see the difference, right? You can see battling with depression, doing much better. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is stuff that you can get help with. And the one thing I want to make everybody know is that this is not something that you can just snap out of yourself. This is not something that you can just will yourself out of. If you are at all battling with depression, or if you think you might be battling with depression or any other mental illness, talk to your doctor, get some help. You cannot do this alone. That's a myth that has been perpetuating our society, that you can somehow just, man up. Or there's also lots of stigmas against males having mental illness, hence the man up. But anyways, you can't do it alone. Get some help. And if you don't know where to start, come talk to me. I've been through it, and we'll get you on the right path. All right, enough about me. Group activity time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a brief mental workout just to kind of shake the cobwebs off. All right, so I'll give you the instructions for the first activity. All right, so there's 2 challenges. Again, work as a group. And if you have seen these before, just kind of recuse yourself. Don't give away the answer. Challenge number 1. All right, so you're going to be asked to connect those 9 dots using 4 straight lines without lifting the pencil from the paper. So 4 straight lines, you change direction, that's a new line. You trace back over the line, that's a new line. So any change in direction is a new line, has to be straight. Connect all 9 dots, 4 straight lines without lifting the paper, and I'll give you a few minutes to give that a shot. And also feel free to discuss ideas amongst yourselves. Oh, and I forgot to mention this. On the back, there's like extra dots, extra sets of dots, so you don't have to keep erasing things on the back of that second page. Yeah, that's the one. All right, nicely done. All right, 1 successful solution. All matching must be used. All squares will be one match by one match. Asymmetry. So how are things going here? Yeah, it's not looks like. Okay. So what's been tried so far? Are you guys trying to do it on your head? So I would recommend get something on paper, so flip to the back. You got 6 different sets that you can kind of go out with. And start drawing stuff up because it is hard to keep that many moving parts in your head when you're trying to figure this out. So give it a shot. You guys got a solution? Yep, that's it. All right, we got two solved. Anything here? No, I don't think it's fairly short. I will. So, take a look at everything that you've done. You're not going to be on you let the 9 dots on the box. The solution requires not that. The solution does require you to go on that boundary. Closer, but no. So on this one, we'll actually do connect them. But instead of, see how you do here? Yeah. Like I'll start here and I'll stop here. You'll actually have to have lines that go out. Okay. It's doable. Yeah, I know it is. It is early in the morning. So I see you got some stuff on paper. Cool. That's super close. So I was gonna give you guys a hint that you need to go beyond the box that is defined by the 9 squares in order to get the solution. You have this part here, totally. So I'll start with this line and try to repeat that. So do that. What you just did. Keep going. No, keep going in the direction. All right. Okay, so we got, oh no, wait, we got 3. Any bonus ideas from Mary attempts? All right. Okay, so this first challenge, I like including this one because it illustrates one aspect of experimental psychology, and one of the reasons why we need experimental psychology is because oftentimes the way that we think things are is not actually the way that things really are, and that goes double for the human mind. So there are so many ways that we think, oh, the human mind must work like this. Oh, the human mind must work like this. And they're absolutely not true. And they only get exposed by experimental psychology. And the other reason I do this one is because experimental psychology oftentimes requires forgetting about your old thinking and embracing a new style of thinking. So that is the only way to solve this. So to solve this, the challenge is you have to break out of your own mental limitations that says your solution has to be contained within this box that's defined by the 9 dots. So this is where I believe the phrase think outside the box actually comes from, because if you're going to solve this, there's line number 1. Line number 2 has to go outside of the box. Line number 3 goes down there. Line number 4 comes back. 4 straight lines, never lifting the pencil. But you have to be willing to forget about the old things that you know, hey, stay within the box, and embrace these new things as you discover them. All right, group activity number 2. Challenge number 2. So for this one, you got matchsticks in an arrangement, and you want to rearrange those so that they form 4 squares that are connected either by an edge or by a corner instead of 5. Only 3 matches may be moved. All the squares must be the same size. So this one does not have any sort of outside of the box requirement. So there's no stacking the matches, you're not burning the matches, you're not breaking the matches in half. You're not doing anything weird like that. You're moving 3 matches so that you form 4 connected squares instead of 5. And the hint that I'll give you is that the squares can be connected either by edges like this or just by corners, like sharing the same touching corner. All right, so give that a shot and we'll see if we can get some more solutions. So for the solution, you will be using all the matches. They all have to be part of the solution. They all have to be connected. So give it a shot. Yep. That's it. Nicely done. All right, we have one. Well, it has to be, they all have to form squares. You can't have like any leftover pieces. But this one, those are part of the line. Now, where do they come from? Let's figure it out. But those are part of the correct sum. This one. Those two are part of the correct solution. Yeah. Now, where did they come from? I'm not too sure where you took them from, but in the final solution, that's where 2 of the matches that you're moving. Okay, so I'll give the remaining groups a hint. So you made, in this case, you got 5 squares made out of these matches, and you're being asked to do 4 squares made out of the same number of matches. The only way that you get 5 squares made out of this many matches is because a lot of those matches are doing double duty, right? So this match over here is an edge for this square and this square, right? This match over here is an edge for this square and this square. So they're sharing matches. So that's the only way that you can get 5 squares. To get 4 squares, you're going to have to be very inefficient in the way that you use your matches so that no squares will be sharing an edge with any other square. All right, so every square will be made out of 4 matches, and none of them will be sharing an edge with other squares. So they'll be sharing corners, but they won't be sharing edges. I know. So is yeah, this one is no mentions. This one's less of a and just more of a probably that Well, you can't put matches on top. Well, your next is not. Well, I'm going to end this in about a minute. So. So it's not, I mean, it's not like a super simple solution, but it's not like a 9-dot solution where it's like, that's 30 seconds. You know, so it's just a matter of, really, it's just a matter of kind of discovering the right matches that need to be. Which ones are you thinking? Which ones are you thinking? So those ones will stay. I'll give you that. These end ones here, you won't be able to stay. You're moving 3 other ones. Those are 2 of the ones. Wait, you're pointing to one of them. What was the other one you pointed? These 2? Yeah. Those are 2 that did. These 2. Oh, I think I got it. So you're looking to move into 3, destroy. Wait, what? Move these 2 here. Well, there's 2 of them. This one, this one, this one. Yeah, you got it. So wait, I mean, these 2 here. These 2, like these 2, you let me square. This is the square, this is the square. Yeah. Then you've got 4 squares that are all connected by 4. Yep. Just connected by 4. But we can't take one. All right. Just these 3. Last attempt. Yep. Yep. That's it. All right. So in the interest of time, I'll show you the solutions right now. So this one I included because in experimental psychology, for those of you, especially that go on when you do your advanced lab, when you do grad work, you'll continue to do experimental psychology. And this is kind of the non-flashy side of experimental psychology. So oftentimes, we do have these aha moments. We do have these great insights, kind of like the 9-dot problem. Other times, it's just a matter of trying things until you figure out this new idea in psychology. So for this one, this was more of a keep trying stuff until something works out. So the matches that needed to be moved, there's that one, and that one. So that's 3 matches, and you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. None of them are sharing an edge. They're all sharing corners, and that's why you can do 4 matches with the 4 squares with the 16 matches. All right, so that's it for the group activity. So if you guys want to kind of move back to your original locations, and we'll finish off today with a look at the course overview, and then just some of the syllabus highlights, just so that we're all prepared and on the same page in terms of what's happening this semester. All right, so the rest of this information will be available on the syllabus that you can download from Canvas. In addition, the slides that I use in class will also be available unless there's like a spoiler alert, like next class when we're doing our in-class experiment. So they'll usually be available before class for you to download and access. And on the days where I can't do that, they'll definitely be available after class for you to download. So this isn't a speed writing course. You can print these out or just know that you have them available to you whenever you might need them. All right, so course objectives. This is where you're basically going to learn how to design and execute experiments in psychology, how to search the literature, how to prepare an experimental report, how to read experimental reports. So this really is an important component of your psychology education, because almost all psychology comes from experiments that discover how your mind works. So in order to advance psychology, you need to know these experimental techniques in order to add to the body of knowledge of psychology. And then on the flip side of that, if you want to read about and learn about the information in psychology, it's all there in those experimental reports. So you're transitioning right now, you're transforming beyond information that has been condensed and summarized for you in, say, for example, a textbook, to individuals that can find the latest information, can find their own information, and can make their own interpretations of what that means. So that's what part of this course is going to be about, learning how to understand experiments so that you can benefit from that in your psychology career, regardless of whether you ever do an experiment again. So some of the objectives include using deductive reasoning. We'll take a look at that. Preparing an experimental report, a research paper in APA format. So you will be writing a research paper. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Interpreting simple statistics. It's not a statistics course, but it will let you know a little bit about what you need, just what you need for understanding the experiment that we're going to be doing. How to search the literature using databases. We're going to have a special class where we go to the library and we learn how to search databases that you're probably already familiar, including other ones like Web of Science that are very useful, especially for people starting out in a field. Web of Science is an absolutely crucial resource. Critically evaluating information. How do you distinguish primary and secondary sources? And also you'll be peer reviewing each other's work as we start writing our research report. And then other things that are involved in experimental psychology. We'll kind of take a broad overview of all the skills that you need in order to do and understand experimental psychology. This, you saw the critical thinking aspect there. This course actually does fulfill IUSB's critical thinking requirement. So we will, throughout the year, practice and assess these skills on critical thinking as we move through the course content. All right, so let's take a little bit of a interlude here, and we'll do a little bit of history. So we're going to go over some great thinkers who have made contributions to psychology. So Plato and Aristotle, started these huge schools of philosophy. Psychology has often been described as just scientific philosophy. So they kind of came in with a lot of the original ideas that psychologists later on said, hey, let's actually test these and see if these thinkers had the right idea. If you're doing cognitive psychology, you can thank Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer, for laying down some of the ideas about algorithms and steps that we can use to solve computational problems. We got Nietzsche, another philosopher who Sigmund Freud said was the most self-aware person that he had ever met. And speaking of Sigmund Freud, we have him as well, a great thinker that contributed lots of ideas to psychology. Very importantly, the idea that we are unaware of a lot of the things that influence our behavior. So that idea of the unconscious mind that is driving a lot of our behaviors, that was his idea that really made almost all of psychology possible. So we have these four great thinkers, four great people that contributed a lot to psychology. But as great as they were not experimental psychologists. And because of that, a lot of the ideas that they came up with were just simply incorrect. So Plato and Aristotle, Aristotle had this whole theory of physics that stood around for about 2,000 years before it was disproven, and it was literally like cartoon physics. So if you've ever watched a cartoon where somebody runs off a cliff and they continue running until they stop and then they look down and they fall down, that's Aristotle's physics. That's what he actually thought would occur. And then Sigmund Freud, a lot of his theories have just gone by the wayside, just been proved not to actually be true. So they made great contributions, but they weren't experimental psychologists, and that limited their ability to advance psychology. What we're going to do is we're going to take you guys, who are all great thinkers, made it here to university, and we're going to change you from somebody like Aristotle, who came up with an idea, but it was the wrong idea, to somebody like Newton, who was an experimentalist, who came up with ideas and said, let me test these, let me evaluate these, let me use experiments to figure out, are these ideas true? And then if they were supported, he said, yes, they're true. If they were refuted, he said, no, let me try something else. So that's the goal of this course, to take you from being, great thinkers to experimental thinkers. So this course, again, is going to give you new tools. It's going to change the way that you think. You're going to learn how to think like an experimental scientist. So you're going to go from being Plato or Ada, and you're going to become Isaac Newton. And this is something that needs to be developed. So experimental thinking, experimental procedures, these are skills that are not intuitive. These are things that people don't naturally develop on their own. So they need to be developed. They need to be taught. They're not natural. But that's actually really, really good news, because I'm going to assume that everybody is starting at the beginning, right? I'm going to assume that nobody has been perusing Isaac Newton and B.F. Skinner's Wikipedia page, just brushing up on, on a Friday night. You're like, oh yeah, let me see where the rabbit hole goes on my experimental psychology. No, I don't think, everybody here, I'm assuming you're starting at the beginning. So that's how this course is going to be structured. And then the other thing I want everybody to know is that everyone can do this. So experimental thinking is not the purview of, geniuses that, are these super agile minds. Everybody can do this. This is a structured way of thinking that everyone can learn and then apply in their clinical psychology practice, in their teaching psychology, in any sort of psychology that you want to do. All right, course procedure. I'm going to run this course like a research lab meeting. That's how I do most of my courses. So all course content is open to ideas and discussion. Just raise your hand. Look at that slide. Dr. Yudicevich, is this like this? Dr. Yudicevich, I just read this thing about this. Dr. Yudicevich, does this work like this? Anything that you want to know, please raise your hand. I am a firm believer that there are no bad questions or bad ideas. So everybody knows that that phrase, there's no bad questions except the one that's not asked. So there's no bad questions, there's no bad ideas. However, there are wrong ideas. And my experience has been that many of your ideas are going to be wrong, because again, this is not an intuitive way of thinking. So your ideas, you might actually have 95% of your ideas might be wrong. You might put up your hand and say, Dr. Yudicevich, does this work? Is this what you mean by an independent variable? And the answer could very well be no, it's not. That's actually the dependent variable. But that's just the way that science works. That's basically my life every single day. So many experiments that I'm like, oh, this is for sure going to happen, turn out the other way. And then other experiments where I'm like, this experiment has no chance, end up being huge findings. So science and experimental science is basically just feeling around in the dark, trying to figure out what's out there. What does nobody know yet? What are we going to discover? And when you're trying to discover something, you're going to be wrong a lot. So don't feel intimidated about being wrong. We'll correct your ideas. We'll get you on the right track. And just know that that's my life. That's my career that I chose. So I'll understand, no bad ideas, no bad questions. Let's make sure that everybody is moving forward. All right, syllabus and contact information. Again, make sure that you take a look at the class schedule. All the due dates are there. You can plan out your semester. And do make sure that you don't miss any due dates. Maximize your points. And that's what we're going to be doing through this class. All right, so one last thing. So that's it for today. So just a reminder, next class, we're going to be doing the experiment. You're going to be participating in the experiment that we're going to be basing the rest of this semester on. So that's one of your attendance highly recommended days so that you can get that experience. And then the other thing is that if you came in late and you didn't have a chance to sign in, please do so so that you can earn your first points towards class attendance. Other than that, we're done for today. Thanks for coming out.